Today we'll start the program with recitation of Quran.
Yeah. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم قل اللهم مالك الملك تؤتي الملك من تشاء وتنزع الملك ممن تشاء وتعز من تشاء وتذل من تشاء بيدك الخير إنك على كل شيء قدير تولج الليل في النهار وتولج النهار في الليل وتخرج الحي من الميت وتخرج الميت من الحي وترزق من تشاء بغير حساب لا يتخذ المؤمنون الكافرين أولياء من دون المؤمنين ومن يفعل ذلك فليس من الله في شيء إلا أن تتقوا منهم تقاه ويحذركم الله نفسه وإلى الله المصير قل إن تخفوا ما في صدوركم أو تبدوه يعلم الله ويعلم ما في السماوات وما في الأرض والله على كل شيء قدير يوم تجد كل نفس ما عملت من خير محضر وما عملت من سوء تود لو أن بينها وبينه أمدا بعيدا ويحذركم الله نفسه والله رؤوف بالعباد قل إن كنتم تحبون الله فاتبعوني يحببكم الله ويغفر لكم ذنوبكم والله غفور رحيم قل أطيعوا الله والرسول فإن تولوا فإن الله لا يحب الكافرين صدق الله العلي
Thank you very much. We're now very fortunate to have Imran Mulla, who will be speaking to us on his new book called The Indian Caliphate, Exiled Ottomans and the Billionaire Prince. Let's welcome Salat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. Imran Mulla is Middle East Eye's UK political correspondent, covering both British foreign policy and domestic politics. He's written for BBC Hindi, Conservative Home, The Critic, The Varsity, and many other publications. His first book is The Indian Caliphate, Exiled Ottomans and the Billionaire Prince, which was published yesterday. This is his first public discussion on the book. It uncovers how the exiled last Ottoman caliph, a painter and musician, launched a plan to revive the caliphate in India with the help of a billionaire prince, the world's richest man. Salat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad.
Bismillah. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Can everyone hear me all right? It's very good to be here, so thank you so much for the invite. I'm delighted to be here, and this is indeed the first public talk I've given since the book came out yesterday, so Very happy to be here. And this is the book, The Indian Caliphate, Exiled Ottomans and the Billionaire Prince. And I'm a journalist by profession. I studied history at university. But this is not an academic book. It's a book which has a journalistic approach. And it's my attempt to uncover and excavate a forgotten chapter of our global history. And this is a story of how the last Ottoman Caliph, Abdul Majid II, when he was exiled from Istanbul, launched a secret plot to revive the Caliphate in India with the help of the Nizam of Hyderabad. This is a story that's been lost and consigned to oblivion, and barely anyone knows about it because it was deliberately covered up. And so the point of this book is to try and set the historical record straight. It's a story of global interconnected history and things that have been forgotten. So it all begins with this extraordinary tomb which I found in the middle of Maharashtra, a western state in India. And I was trekking through it was close to the jungle. It's completely abandoned, it's remote, it's 40 degrees Celsius. I only had half a bottle of water with me, which was not very wise. I was here to find this tomb, and no one in the region has any idea what the tomb was there for. It's an Ottoman tomb, so it's in the Ottoman Turkish style, which you'll know is completely bizarre because the Ottomans never ruled in India. The Ottoman Empire, India was never part of the Ottoman Empire. So my question was, how on earth did an abandoned Ottoman tomb end up in the middle of Maharashtra, this state in India? And what was the story that led to this? And you can see it's a very grand tomb. It's really falling apart, completely abandoned. People who visit and leave graffiti had no idea what it was there for. And you can see in the middle on the right, there's a sunken pit where there should be a body buried, but there's absolutely nothing there. Now, the man who wanted to be buried in this tomb was none other than this guy standing on the right, Abdul Majid II, who was, in this photo, an Ottoman prince, but he would later become the Caliph, the Khalifa, the last nominal ruler of the Sunni Islamic world. So this Ottoman prince was what first made me interested in this topic, because he was an absolutely extraordinary and paradoxical figure. He was a painter, a musician, a literary critic, and a poet all at once. He was raised in confinement in the last days of the Ottoman Empire. All the princes were locked up under the reign of Sultan Abdul Hamid because the Sultan was so worried that they would try and take over his throne. So he kept them all in confinement, and while he was sort of locked away in the Ottoman harem in the palace, he spent his days painting and writing poetry. And a lot of his painting would seem very odd to us today. He painted Orientalist depictions of the Ottoman harem in a sort of European style. He also painted mosques, and he did calligraphy. So he was interested in Islamic art, but also European art. And this was because he saw himself as an Ottoman European Muslim. He believed that he was a Westerner as well as an Easterner. And so this is an example of some of his paintings. On the left, a mosque. On the right, completely different, the Ottoman harem in a sort of European-style imaginary. Now, here you have, on the right, another painting by Abdul Majid, which is actually a very accurate depiction of what the Ottoman harem looked like. Not this sort of extremely exotic scene, but instead you have Abdul Majid sitting on the right there and other members of his family all playing music. And this painting is called Beethoven in the Harem. So the last caliph loved Beethoven and loved European classical music. And on the left, he's there playing the cello, but he also played the piano, and he was a harpsichordist as well. So this is a very sort of cultivated, some might think paradoxical figure. But now here he is in 1922, having become the last caliph. So the Ottoman Empire crumbled after the First World War. This was an empire that had governed vast swathes of the Islamic world, spanning Europe, Asia, and Africa. Then it was all gone. And in 1922, the Ottoman Empire was ended, and Mustafa Kemal Ataturk built a new Turkish nation. So now you had the nation of Turkey. And Ataturk, the new president, he actually abolished the Sultanate, so the institution of Ottoman rule. But he didn't abolish the Caliphate. So in the old days, the Ottoman Sultan was also the Caliph, so claimed leadership of the world's Sunnis. But now there was a Caliph in Istanbul, but he was elected for the first time by the Grand National Assembly, the government in Ankara, the new capital of Turkey. So this was an unprecedented situation. Abdul Majid became the first and last caliph of the Turkish Republic. This was an Ottoman caliphate without an empire. And here you see him sitting on a chair on the left. Now he's grown a beard, and there he's riding in front of, everyone knows this building, the Hagia Sophia in Istanbul. Now the Turkish government wanted Abdul Majid to keep a low profile, not cause too many problems. They wanted it to be something a bit like how you have a monarchy here. King Charles doesn't actually have any power and doesn't intervene in politics, because that would threaten the authority of the actually elected government. But Caliph Abdul Majid had different ideas, and he was a very loud, vocal ruler, and the Turkish government grew increasingly unhappy with him riding on his horse through the streets of Istanbul. He was super popular, and you basically had this rival power center in Istanbul, the old Ottoman capital, and Turkey, the Turkish government was not happy with that. And so in 1924, after Abdul Majid had only spent about just over a year as caliph, they abolished the caliphate. Now this was a monumental move. It completely transformed Islamic history, because the Ottoman Caliphate had lasted for over 500 years, and now it was gone. And Turkey said that the authority of the Caliphate is vested in the new Turkish nation. And this is a quote here on the right from the Prime Minister of Turkey, Ismet Pasha, who declared in the parliament as they were debating whether to abolish the Caliphate. He said, "If other Muslims have shown sympathy for us, this was not because we had the Caliph, but because we have been strong." So he said, this is the modern world now, we don't need a Caliphate. And so what happened to Abdul Majid? Well, Turkish soldiers at 5 in the morning on the 3rd of March 1924 surrounded his palace, the Dolmabahce Palace in Istanbul. They marched in, they found the Caliph in his library reading the Quran, and they told him that he was deposed and that he had just a few hours to pack all his things and get his family out, and they were going to have to leave Turkey forever. And so the Caliph argued with them. They didn't listen. He and his family were bundled onto, they were bundled into a car and then onto the Orient Express, and they were exiled to Switzerland. Now, here's where most historians leave the story. They say, yes, it was extraordinary, the Caliphate was abolished, and now we're going to look at modern Turkey. But I was interested in what on earth happened to Abdul Majid when he was sent off to Switzerland. Did he just sort of sit there, lead a quiet life, painting, and not say anything more about it? What I ultimately found is that he did the exact opposite. As soon as he got to Switzerland, he launched a plot to revive the Caliphate. So he issued a proclamation declaring, "It is now for the Muslim world alone which has the exclusive right to pass with full authority and incomplete liberty upon this vital question." So he argued that the Turkish government does not have the authority to abolish the Caliphate. I derive my legitimacy from the recognition and support of the world's Muslims. And so what he was arguing for was a fundamentally modern, democratic Ottoman Caliphate without an empire. It was a post-imperial caliphate that he wanted. And here he is with his daughter, Princess Dourchevar, on the French Riviera. So this is in Nice in the late 1920s. And he lived in a nice seafront villa on the Riviera with his family. And the reason he could do this was because he was being patronized and financially supported by this man, the Nizam of Hyderabad. Now, the Nizam was the ruler of this princely state in India, which was the size of Italy. It had an economy the size of Belgium, the princely state of Hyderabad. Now, not many people know that India, which was obviously under British rule, about a third of the country was actually under princely rule, so it was only indirectly governed by the British. So they couldn't manage foreign policy, and there was a British representative sort of keeping an eye on things in the government. But these princes had almost complete autonomy and freedom within their own states to run it as they willed. And the Nizam of Hyderabad was the richest man in the world after the death of J.D. Rockefeller. He was the fifth richest man who had ever lived, and the Asaf Jahi dynasty, his ruling dynasty, was the richest Muslim family in the world, of course, and he governed this vast, modernizing princely state. Here he is on the right in a sherwani, and on the left in a suit and tie. And the Nizam was notorious for, even though he was so rich, he was very austere, and as he grew older, he stopped wearing nice clothes. He once stormed away from an ice cream van because he was outraged at the price. He thought it was too expensive. But this was a very shrewd, very intelligent, very competent ruler. And of course, he had a significant claim to being the foremost Muslim ruler in the world. After all, he was the richest, but also he was in India. Now, in India, by which I mean the subcontinent, so not the modern state of India, this also encompasses Pakistan and Bangladesh and more than that. India had more Muslims than the entire Arab world put together, even though they were a minority. So India was a country with the largest number of Muslims in the world. And that's why the Indian poet-philosopher Sir Muhammad Iqbal once said, India is the greatest Muslim country in the world. And it was because of this demographic argument. And India was also part of the British Empire. And because of its huge Muslim population, the British Empire used to declare that it was the greatest Muslim power in the world. So I think someone should remind Nigel Farage of that fact, that 100 years ago, Britain claimed to be the greatest Muslim power in the world. And this was something that the Ottomans weren't very fond of. But Indian Muslim politicians themselves took this on and said, yes, we are the greatest Muslim power in this world, and for this reason, Britain has to listen to us and respect our positions. So here's some photos of Hyderabad that I took when I was there researching. You have a grand, old-fashioned Mughal-style palace here, the Chau Mahalla Palace. Here is a very different Hyderabadi palace, the Falak Numa, which was built in a European style, very modern, and today it's been turned into a fancy hotel, which costs a lot of money for one night there, and so it's in perfect condition. But Hyderabad was legendary for its sort of the extravagance of its courtly life, the sheer amount of wealth, the elites that were there. And the reason that Hyderabad became linked to the last Ottoman Caliph in exile was because of the Khilafat movement. Now, the Khilafat movement is actually quite well known. It was essentially India's first nationwide mass movement against the British. The Khilafat movement was a protest movement that involved civil disobedience against the European occupation of Ottoman lands in the last days of the Ottoman Empire, and in favor of the Caliphate. And it was a movement that involved Sunni Indian Muslims and Shia Indian Muslims, and also involved Hindus. So here we have a photo of Mahatma Gandhi, who was one of the leaders of the Khilafat movement. So Hindu leaders, as well as Muslim leaders, took part in pan-Islamic politics because they believed that this was a perfect way for India to engage in global anti-colonial solidarity movements and political movements. And the quote that I've included on the right is by one of the leaders of the Khilafat movement, Maulana Muhammad Ali. And here he was answering the Hindu nationalist accusation that because Muslims cared about Muslims elsewhere in the world, they weren't loyal to India. So he said, I belong to two circles of equal size, but which are not concentric. One is India, and the other is the Muslim world. We as Indian Muslims belong in both circles. We belong to these two circles, each of more than 300 millions, and we can leave neither. Now, this debate over where Muslim loyalties lie and whether Muslims can be loyal to a nation as well as to a global Islamic world is a debate that is still had today in this country and in many other countries, including India. So before I get onto these people, I would also add that one of the leaders of the Khilafat movement was Aga Khan III, who was the leader of the Ismaili community. And the Aga Khan and another very famous Shia Muslim intellectual called Sayyid Amir Ali, they together wrote a famous letter to Mustafa Kemal Ataturk before the caliphate was abolished, urging him not to abolish the caliphate because they argued that this would have fatal consequences for the Muslim world at large. So even though they didn't accept the authority of the Sunni Ottoman Caliphate, they were still leaders of this movement. And one of the central themes of the Khilafat movement was actually Shia-Sunni unity. These people are key to our story today. On the left, you have Marmaduke Pickthall. Pickthall was a great British Muslim convert intellectual who was very pro-Ottoman, also very pro-empire, and Pickthall was paid by the Nizam of Hyderabad to produce an English translation of the Quran, which is still actually very widely used to this day. And on the other side, you have Maulana Muhammad Ali in the black Sherwani and his older brother Maulana Shaukat Ali. Now the Ali brothers are very well known today, but people don't actually know much about them. So they were heroes of the early independence movement, leaders of the Khilafat movement, allies of Gandhi, and they later joined the Muslim League. But after the abolition of the Caliphate, these men joined up with Marmaduke Pickthall to plot the revival of the Ottoman Caliphate. And Muhammad Ali actually died in 1930 in London, and it was Shaukat Ali and Marmaduke Pickthall who came up with a plan to join the Ottoman family, which was in exile, to the Asaf Jahi dynasty that ruled Hyderabad. So their idea was to have the Caliph's daughter, Princess Durrashahvar, get married to the Nizam of Hyderabad's eldest son. And this was a genius idea, they believed, because they were joining the Caliphal family to the richest Muslim family in the world. But it was also joining the heirs to the Mughal Empire with the heirs to the Ottomans and joining the west and east of the Islamic world. So this would be a union of two of Islam's greatest houses, and they thought that this was going to be monumental and would lead to a revival of the caliphate. So here's a very famous photo taken by an also very famous photographer, Cecil Beaton, of Princess Durrashahvar. She was 10 years old when she was exiled from Istanbul, and she was an extraordinary woman. Her teenage years were spent on the French Riviera, where she learned, poetry and spoke multiple languages and did art and music. And her father actually gave her a choice, which was quite rare, of whether to marry this Indian prince. And he said the marriage is only going to happen if they take a fancy to each other. And they did, and they got married in 1931. And she moved to Hyderabad and became an Indian princess. And here's a quote from her in Hyderabad talking about Hyderabad's modernization. She said, "Ancient romantic customs are constantly fostered and are still dominant. Modern progress merely improves but does not kill them." Now, Princess Durrashahvar is still famous in Hyderabad to this day for a lot of her philanthropic and charitable work. So she set up educational initiatives, particularly with regards to women's education. And here you have a scene from the wedding between Azam Jah, the Nizam's eldest son, and Princess Durrashahvar, the Caliph's daughter. You can see the Caliph there sitting in the middle, and there's another bride as well, another Ottoman princess. Durrashahvar's cousin, Princess Nilufar, married another of the Nizam's son, Prince Muazzam Jah. So it was a double wedding in November 1931, and this was an intensely political event. The Caliph made it a condition of the marriage negotiations that the firstborn son of the marriage will be the next ruler of Hyderabad. So the last Ottoman Caliph was here securing a future for his lineage and his dynasty. And this was a quote put out by the Hyderabadi government when the marriage happened, saying that the marriages will unite two Muslim dynasties by the intimate ties of family love, an event which cannot fail to have a very happy repercussion on the Muslim world. So it was a marriage of extreme political significance. But at the same time, there was another aspect to this plan, and this involved Palestine. So Maulana Shaukat Ali and the Caliph together arranged a congress in Jerusalem in December 1931. They were going to organize this huge conference and invite Muslim leaders from across the world, and the plan was that Caliph Abdul Majid would turn up in Jerusalem and address the Congress and secure support from the world's Muslim leaders for a revived caliphate. Except it didn't work because Turkish spies got wind of the plan and they lobbied the British to stop it, and the British, who were governing Palestine at the time, banned the Caliph from entering Palestine. So the Caliph didn't end up at the Congress, but this event, which became known as the World Islamic Congress, would prove monumental for Palestinian history because it was the first time that Palestine became recognized as a global pan-Islamic and pan-Arab cause. So it was hugely significant. And on the top you have a photo of Maulana Shaukat Ali, and below other photos of the Congress and the delegates. And some of the delegates were actually arrested for speeches that they gave condemning Zionist occupation in the British during the Congress. And here you have a photo depicting an early edition of the Palestinian flag, which was actually presented to Maulana Shaukat Ali as a gift. And the quote here is from the very famous poet-philosopher Muhammad Iqbal, who addressed the Congress. He was one of the main speakers and said, "I'm not afraid of the enemies of Islam. My fear is from the Muslims themselves. Whenever I ponder, I bow my head in shame over the thought that we are not worthy of the great prophet of Islam." And this was a monumental moment because Iqbal would become known as one of the greatest modern Muslim philosophers. And here he was speaking not just to an Indian audience now, but a global Muslim audience. And this was the legacy of this marital union. You have Prince Azam Jah, the Nizam's son, Princess Durrashivar, and their young baby, Prince Mukarram Jah. Now, all eyes were on Prince Mukarram because his maternal grandfather was the last Ottoman Caliph. He had the blood of the Caliphate running through his veins, as it were, and his paternal grandfather was the Nizam. And it wasn't publicly known, but the Nizam secretly decided, while he was still a baby, that actually the succession is not going to pass to Azam Jah. This baby, Prince Mukarram Jah, will be the next Nizam of Hyderabad, the next ruler once I'm gone. And so Mukarram Jah was put in a perfect place to eventually claim the title of Caliph as well. And here you have Prince Muazzam Jah and the Ottoman princess, Princess Nilufar. Their marriage didn't go well, and they split up after the fall of Hyderabad, and Princess Nilufar lived her final days in France. But Muazzam Jah was famous for being, he was called the best-dressed man in Europe, and that was because he would have 30 suits brought with him wherever he went. But he was also this great poet, and his pen name was Shaji, and his poetry is actually often recited and performed today, often in qawwalis. And here's an English translation of one of his poems. You know, when thought of you came, it was lonesome indeed, to neither joy nor sorrow did it lead. And Muazzam Jah would hold these nocturnal courts in his palace, where his select courtiers and poets would recite poetry all night and sort of stumble home bleary-eyed in the morning. So these were very, very colourful figures, and these were the sort of the last days of Hyderabad, you know, in all its glittering glory, but it was all about to come crumbling down. And now we come to the death of the last caliph in 1944. He died in Paris. By this point, he was staying in a small cottage, and it was under Nazi occupation because this was World War II, and there was a firefight between American soldiers and Nazi soldiers. And in the gunfire, Abdul Majid had a heart attack and he died. And so after his death, there became the question of what's going to happen to the Caliphate. And what the man on the right here, Sir Arthur Lothian, was a British resident in Hyderabad who discovered the truth about what the Caliph wanted, according to him. And so I was sort of rummaging around in the archives in the British Library among all these dusty documents, and I came across this slip of paper which was marked top secret or confidential, and it was by Sir Arthur Lothian, and he was writing to his colleagues, and he said that the Nizam told him that the Caliph had wanted to be buried in Hyderabad, but he didn't want to do that. And the Nizam didn't say anything about what the Caliph wanted regarding the succession, but he had discovered by the Nizam's prime minister had revealed to him that the Caliph had named Mukarram Jah as his successor in the Caliphate. So this bombshell document was sent to his superiors in Delhi. And there's another document I discovered, which was by the Secretary of State in Delhi to the Viceroy of India. So it went right to the top, in which they discussed in 1946 the fact that the Nizam had asked to bury the Caliph in his state in Hyderabad and to build a tomb for him. And they said, what are we going to do about it? We don't want news to get out that the last Ottoman Caliph has designated his grandson his successor. And they decided that, you know, the boy, he's still a boy, the Nizam's not going to die anytime soon, we're probably going to leave India in a few years, let the Nizam build his tomb as long as it's kept a secret. And that is what happened. But then you have the fall of Hyderabad. So in 1947, the British left and India was partitioned into, different states. You had the creation of Pakistan, but you also had this big question of what happens to these princely states. Do they become independent, or do they join India or Pakistan? And the Nizam wanted to be independent. Now, this would have been plausible if there had been a sort of Indian federation, which was on the table as late as 1946. So we often forget that even though we think that the Muslim League and Muhammad Ali Jinnah went for partition, they actually agreed in 1946 to an Indian federation, which was the creation of a Pakistan within a greater India. And so it would be part of the same thing. The princely states would be autonomous. And within those conditions, you can imagine that the Nizam could keep his state, and in a few decades, Prince Mukarram Jah, as the new Nizam, could claim the caliphal title, and he would be a caliph not ruling all over India, but he would rule in Hyderabad, but he would be connected through this federation to the Muslims of India, the largest Muslim population in the world, and so he would have an immensely credible claim to be a sort of symbolic caliph, and this could be huge for India's soft power in the Muslim world. So this was the idea. It wasn't about taking over India, it was about India as the center of the Islamic world in this period, and that was the vision. But partition made it impossible, because the new Indian government was never going to accept this huge princely state in the middle of its territory. Now, Muhammad Ali Jinnah urged the Nizam to go for to join Pakistan firstly, but that wasn't plausible. There were even some ideas among members of the Muslim League that the Nizam should be a sort of constitutional king of Pakistan. But in the end, Jinnah said to the Nizam, look, you've got to go for independence. And he warned the Indians that if you lay a hand on Hyderabad, all the Muslims of India will rise up to defend the country's oldest dynasty, which of course didn't happen. So in September 1948, Muhammad Ali Jinnah died. The very next day, India invaded Hyderabad. So the troops went pouring in. Here you have an army tank going into Hyderabad. The Nizam's government surrendered almost immediately. And in the aftermath, you had the killing of tens of thousands of people, mainly Muslims, the ethnic cleansing of tens of thousands more. It's one of the most extraordinary atrocities of 20th century Indian history, and it was covered up by the Indian government. But this was a consequence of the fall of Hyderabad. Some observers put the estimates about 100,000 people killed. Others put it even higher, completely covered up, never acknowledged by the Indian government. The report into what had happened only surfaced about a decade ago, but still, if you go to Hyderabad and go to its museums, there will be no mention of this whatsoever. It's as though in the public mind this just didn't happen. And here we have the elderly 7th Nizam, Usman Ali Khan, having lost his state, lost his power, but he was allowed to keep his palaces. And here's a couplet that he composed because he was quite a poet. By the cruelty of fate, all pleasure is gone out of my life, Usman. Neither that wine remains, nor that company, nor the beloved. And here we have Prince Mukarram Jah, who was supposed to be this great ruler of Hyderabad. Instead, he ended up moving to Australia, where he drove tractors around on a ranch, and then spent the last decades of his life living in a small apartment in Turkey. And none of his neighbors knew who he were. And he died in Istanbul in his apartment in anonymity in 2023. And he's now buried here in the Mecca Masjid in Hyderabad alongside his ancestors. And so I'll leave you with this image of that great Ottoman tomb. And what is the importance of this history? Well, to my mind, it's about these global connections between far-flung regions of the world, cutting across imperial and national boundaries, and also the reminder that it's forgotten today, but in the early 20th century, India was at the very center of the global Islamic world, and that's why you have a random, abandoned, desolate Ottoman tomb in the middle of the Indian jungle. And that's it from me.
Salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. We have time for some questions. Is there any questions from either side?
Thank you very much for your excellent presentation. Very informative. My dear friend Jamil has done quite a lot of work in this area, but the discussions about these things in London at that time. I mean, of course, the Aga Khan used to come, and Jinnah used to come, Amir Ali used to come, and so on. So it parallels what you are saying. But from my interest is that a lot of history has been sort of quietly buried. And I don't know how to revive that. Is there an archive coming up in the Osmania Library or something like that?
Well, I think there's a lot of good historical work being done in academia on this history. Of course, the problem is, what's really interesting is with the issues of like Indian partition, the creation of Pakistan, this period, there's a huge gulf between what academics write about and believe and what the public believes. So public opinion is shaped by politics in India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh, and even our ideas of sort of national heroes like Gandhi and Nehru and Jinnah are completely shaped by nationalistic histories. So either it's Indian nationalism, or maybe it's Hindu nationalism, or Pakistani nationalism. And so the people themselves and their ideas and what they really thought and what they did and their friendships and how they lived are completely forgotten. And a perfect example is the Ali brothers, who were strong believers in Indian unity and Hindu-Muslim unity, and also in the Caliphate. And there were these extraordinary thinkers and politicians, and you have Sayyid Amir Ali, and all these people. They're famous. People know their names, and they have roads named. You know, Muhammad Ali Road in Bombay, and there are many places named after the Ali brothers in Pakistan. But no one actually knows who they were, and that's because of this nationalism. And so I think the solution is more history that's not tied to nationalistic narratives. And I think we do have more of that coming up.
What was their relationship with Maulana Abul Kalam Azad?
So Maulana Azad was also one of the leaders of the Khilafat movement, but then they split paths because Azad joined they were all part of the Congress. He was an ally of Gandhi and Nehru, and he became the president of the Congress, and he was the most prominent Muslim politician who opposed Pakistan. Whereas Obviously, Jinnah went on to lead the Muslim League. The Ali brothers, they died before the Pakistan movement really got going, but they were also part of the Muslim League. So they knew each other, they were connected, but they were on opposite sides of the aisle in the end.
Thank you very much. Any other questions from the other side?
Thank you. Thank you very much for your talk. I had one quick question with regards to how the links between a deposed Ottoman Caliphate and the Nizam of Hyderabad fit into pan-Islamism 3 generations before under Abdul Hamid, and whether the marriage as a process of diplomacy, of bringing communities and societies together, is a long-standing feature in any history, and whether this kind of alliance through marriage was engineered with other Muslim polities. In Southeast Asia, there are marriages into the Ottoman royal family or Ottoman household that happened at the end of the 19th century, but I just wanted to find out if that is part of a policy or are these sporadic events?
Well, I think they're sporadic but interconnected. And we often think of, I mean, pan-Islamism was a term which was used during the late Ottoman Empire to describe Muslims who weren't in the Ottoman Empire, who identified with the Ottomans and with other Muslims. And this was while they were within these colonial empires. And so you had this kind of global Islamic politics, and it really reached its peak in the early 20th century. And I think the period I'm talking about here was the very peak of that. And it's significant because people often forget that although there's always been a sense of an ummah or a Muslim world, in the modern period, this was more connected than ever before, because suddenly people were reading in the newspapers about events that happened half the world away. And you had Indians in Bombay reading about things that happened in Anatolia, in the Ottoman Empire, and talking about it and protesting about it. And so the world grew basically smaller and more interconnected. And so this was a very peak of kind of global Islamic politics, and it also happened because of colonialism and because Muslim, lots of Muslim dynasties and empires fell. Now you had these Muslim populations looking to ideals of Muslim unity in ways that they actually hadn't done before. And so all these attempts were connected. For example, Marmaduke Pickthall, Maulana Shaukat Ali, these people were heavily involved in Islamic political movements, as you saw with the World Islamic Congress. The marriage was part of the same scheme as the World Islamic Congress, which established Palestine as a global Islamic cause. So they were all connected, and essentially this is about royals and princes and princesses becoming entangled in this kind of global Islamic politics, which really reached its height at this point, and then would be sort of completely, firstly shattered, but also new forms of it would emerge, because this is the period when these transnational Muslim elites all fell. So a lot of elites in the Muslim world who had been connected to each other, had cultural links, political links, even marital links, one by one were sort of toppled. New elites emerged. And so the Muslim world in this period was completely reinvented by the fall of the Caliphate, partition of India, and the fall of Hyderabad. These were 3 hugely significant events.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you for your talk. I was wondering if you know much about Khalifa Abdul Majid's religious sensibilities, how I guess religious he was, how practicing he was, and what his vision was in terms of that for the Islamic Caliphate.
So there was a scandal a few years ago in Turkey when a lot of his artwork surfaced, and people were scandalized that he'd been painting sort of living beings, which most Sunni ulama prohibit, And even the nature of some of his paintings were extremely scandalous, and the fact that he loved European classical music. And so a lot of people said, well, he wasn't very religious, and this was why the caliphate fell. No wonder it fell. But actually, when you study his thought and how he felt about the world, he was extremely religious, saw himself as devoted to Islam, was always heavily invested in the idea of the caliphate, and prayed his daily prayers. But he was modernist, and he styled himself the Democrat Prince. So he considered himself a liberal, a modernist, and he wanted Islamic reform. He said, well, the ulama don't like that I'm painting living beings. The ulama need reform so that they start to allow the painting of living beings. So he was very. It's very easy to see some of these figures throughout Islamic history because they're not orthodox in the way we might imagine as being not real Muslims and not concerned with Islam. But actually, from the perspective of a historian, you have to look at how they thought about themselves, and you can agree or disagree. And he was highly sort of engaged with Islam and committed to religious ideals, but maybe not in a way that most people would recognize today.
Thank you for that. When we look at Mughal India, there's a lot of influence of Nur Jahan and Jahangir's politics, and even Jahangir's mother in her politics. I was wondering, Dilshuvar and Nilufar, the two Ottoman princesses, what were their politics? How influential were they in their husbands' political lives?
I would say that they were more impressive figures than their husbands, and is generally considered to be the case, including by people at the time. Princess Durishava, for example, was this highly cultivated, highly educated princess, and Prince Azamjar was, he was asked what three things do you care about most in life, and he said first horse riding, second my duties, and thirdly women. And he was the marriage didn't go that well. And he wasn't considered fit to be the next Nizam, whereas Princess Durishava was she had a lot of agency. So she had ideas about what her son was going to be, about where he should be educated, and she also contributed a great degree to social reform in Hyderabad. So not exactly political reform, but she contributed to a lot of modernization within Hyderabad and women's education and setting up sort of philanthropic initiatives. And Princess Nilufar did as well, to a lesser extent. But both of them are sort of remembered for their roles as kind of very kind of highly educated, sort of very visible in public life, which was unusual at the time because generally, elite women were secluded in Hyderabad, but these princesses were not. So they would appear at public functions, and this obviously had a great impact on public opinion.
Assalamu alaikum, thank you for your talk. I have two questions. So where did Hyderabad's wealth come from? Was it like natural resources or particular industries? And secondly, could you tell us a bit more about your journey in writing the book? So was it something the publishers were interested in, and how did you find it balancing with a day job? And yeah, was it like quite a challenge for you, or and do you think you'll write books on similar subjects, or will you just go where things take you?
Well, I don't know about that one, about the future. I have a quite busy day job. So I'm the, I think it was mentioned at the start, I'm the UK political correspondent of Middle East Eye, which leaves me quite busy. But I discovered this topic while I was in my sort of final year of studying history at university in 2023. And I was studying Ottoman history, modern Middle Eastern history, and modern South Asian history at the same time. So it was a sort of perfect storm. stumbled across this, did a lot of research then, and then after, when I left university, I also did a lot of research. A lot of it was in the archives, so one of the very convenient things for people in Britain is that a lot of modern Indian history is in the British Library and the National Archives, because it was all brought over by the British when they left. Now, obviously, people in those countries would find that terribly unfair, but as one of my friends said to me, I told you there was something good about the British Empire, so it was all very easy. And then I went over to India, to Hyderabad and to Maharashtra, to find the tomb. I toured Hyderabad, sort of historic palaces, and I met and interviewed some people who sort of had ties to this story, knew people involved. One of them, most extraordinary, I think, interview I did was with Princess Kenize, who her mother was an Ottoman princess exiled from Istanbul, and her father was an Indian prince, another Indian prince of the Raja of the North Indian state of Kutwara, and she was born in Paris during World War II. The marriage of her parents had been brokered by Maulana Shaukat Ali. Because of the success of the earlier unions, he became the go-to guy for Ottoman Indian marriages, elite Ottoman Indian marriages. So he brokered this. She gave birth to Princess Kenize during World War II in Paris, and then she passed away of sepsis. And so Princess Kenize ended up raised by nuns in a convent. And when the Raja of Kotwara sent people over to France to try and find his daughter, when the nuns found out, they thought, we can't let this lovely little girl be handed over to an evil Muslim prince. So they hid her, and she was raised as a Christian, as a nun and as a French woman, and then she grew up. She sort of left the convent. She went to the Sorbonne in Paris, and then finally, at the age of 20, she sort of properly discovered her heritage and went to India and met her father for the first time. She's now in her late 80s. I interviewed her when she was in Paris. She's had an extraordinary story, and she's written books about the life of her mother and related issues. And she's now moved back to Turkey because she got so sick of anti-Muslim and anti-Palestinian racism in France. So, and Turkey is a place where her mother was exiled from 100 years ago. So this absolutely extraordinary story. So a mix of archival research, going to places and interviewing people.
The first question about...
Like, where's Hyderabad's wealth come from?
Oh, yes. A lot of it was from the Golconda mines, which are in the region. So basically natural resources, largely. Yeah, a lot of diamonds in Hyderabad. And it was rumoured that the Nizam had underground vaults full of kind of gold and huge rubies. And some of these rumours are true, some of them were not true.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and expertise. Very vast, mashallah, learned a lot. Just wondering, was there any hint that India was going to do this to Hyderabad, and what different history would have prevented it? Like, for example, not even having partition, and could that have been realistic? Thank you.
Yeah, I think it's a very good question, and I think the only way that you could have had a caliph in Hyderabad, as these people wanted, was if you had had an Indian federation, because the federation would have allowed these princely states to continue existing and to be autonomous, and it would have prevented partition. So all Muslims in the subcontinent would be under the sort of same entity, even though there would be a Pakistan, but it would still be joined at the center with the other states. And this was the idea which was signed up to by the Muslim League and the Congress in 1946. So it nearly happened, but then the new Congress president, it was Maulana Azad was the president at this time, and he signed it, Jinnah signed it, and then Jawaharlal Nehru became the Congress president, and he basically tanked the whole thing. Partition was inevitable, and once partition was going to happen, it wasn't feasible that the Nizam could continue to govern Hyderabad in the middle of India. So it was always, it was probably inevitable after partition that Hyderabad would fall to India, the brutality and the bloodshed was not inevitable, and that was a consequence largely of the decisions of the Home Minister of India, Vallabhbhai Patel, who was sort of spearheaded this and sent the troops in, and many historians believe that it didn't have to be that way. But it was obviously terribly bloody, but the whole history of partition was extremely violent. So people often say a federation of India would have led to a kind of civil war between Hindus and Muslims if they were all living in the same state. And that's that's certainly possible, but what was partition if not a civil war? And it was an extended civil war. There was another part of it when Pakistan split into Pakistan and Bangladesh, a few decades later. A very violent history, I'm afraid.
Thank you so much for that. It was really interesting. So continuing on from the previous question, imagine if it had worked, that if they had revived a caliphate from Hyderabad, what would that world look like? How would you speculate that forward? And what would it look like?
Well, I think that's a bit above my sort of capabilities, I'm afraid. I think when it gets to this point, we're sort of shooting arrows in the dark. What I will say is that Muslims generally today would think that the idea of a caliph, of a sort of center of global Islam being in India is absolutely insane. And they go, how on earth would the last Ottoman caliph have looked to India to continue his line? And people do find that sort of bizarre today. People would find it bizarre that, if you said Pakistan could have been the sort of center of the global Islamic world. But the point that I hope this book makes is that in that period, in the early 20th century, it was widely considered, India was widely considered, the subcontinent, to be the epicenter of the Islamic world. And so the idea that the gravity of global Islam would shift to a great city like Hyderabad, which was already considered a sort of Muslim capital, would not have been weird, even though Muslims were just a minority in India. But Muslims were also a minority in the Ottoman Empire for most of its history as well. So the idea wouldn't have seemed strange at the time. What it might have actually looked like, and whether it would have been disastrous or whether everyone would have just ignored the fact that this guy was calling himself caliph, or whether it would have been great, I have absolutely no idea.
Any final questions? We have literally a minute left.
Sorry, thank you very much. Where does this Aligarh movement figure in, and also of course Fadlur Rahman and all those things? And you didn't mention anything about Yusuf Ali. Does he figure at all in your picture?
He doesn't figure in this story, but Aligarh is very important because Aligarh was a university, a Muslim university in India, which was founded in the late 19th century by Sir Syed Ahmad Khan, a famous modernist Muslim who was fiercely loyal to the British Empire and said we have to completely modernize Islam, and his idea of Islam looked suspiciously like Victorian England. But so Aligarh was set up as this kind of fortress of pro-British modernism. But then what happened in the early 20th century is, because you had Muslim elites and kind of middle-class Muslims as well coming here to be educated from all over India, it developed a consciousness of the Indian Muslim people, which hadn't necessarily existed before. You had Muslims from all over India, all different sort of denominations, Shia, various varieties of Sunni, all together, all saying, we're Indian Muslims, and getting involved in the Khilafat movement, in other protest movements. So the Ali brothers went to Aligarh, for example. And so Aligarh became this kind of melting pot from which emerged a lot of the future leaders of India and Pakistan. So it's hugely politically significant and vital to the idea of Indian Islam in that period.
Thank you very much. I think we'll end there. Muhammad wa ala Muhammad salawat. Just a quick question. Where can we get the book?
All good bookshops. You can order it on Amazon, you can order it on Waterstones, you can even order it on W.H. Smith, although I wouldn't recommend it. Don't order it from W.H. Smith in the next few days because it will come late. After that, it's fine. So you can get it anywhere, and it would be fantastic. What I've sort of sketched out here is just the kind of is a sort of very vague, the main ideas of the book. But there's a lot of detail packed into the book, and a lot of stuff about, if you're interested in these characters and people and what happened, then it's all in the book. So I would sort of shamelessly recommend reading the book. Yeah. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Brothers, next week, next Friday, we have Arafah Farouk, who's the CEO of Islamic Makers. She's coming to speak to us about her journey in founding Islamic Makers, the tech company. So please do join us for that. And throughout the rest of the week, we continue with our regular programs. This Sunday, Husseini Madrasa has Creative Learning Day as the final week. And then the rest of our programs continue with the ladies' exercise classes on Mondays and Tuesdays, and our Dua Kamal program on Thursdays. Our regular Friday talks, Salam talks, next week, as I said, is Arafah Farouk, and then our tuition classes and tafsir classes over the weekend. So please do join us for all of those, and all of our information is on our website, sikkim.org.uk.